just to let you know, Tasmanian Police was founded in Tasmania in 1899. That's 2 years before Australia federated. Today, it has 1,200 officers around the state. Tasmanian Fire Service has, and I'm going to make a distinction between career firefighters and volunteer firefighters. The Tasmanian Fire Service has 250 career firefighters and 4,200 volunteer firefighters, which is, by the way, the second highest rate of volunteerism for a fire service in Australia. That's extraordinary. And as Kim Brundle-Lawrence mentioned, you go to a small town and hello, welcome to our town, would you like to join the fire service? It's a part of being the community where everyone chips in together. That represents 1 in 1,000 Tasmanians are a volunteer with the Tasmanian Fire Service. There are also 35 SES teams around Tasmania with 550 volunteers who serve as SES officers. Just the other week, we had fires up here. There were 3 helicopters water bombing, and I came up the road. The SES were blocking the road. The police were blocking it further up here. Fire trucks were up there. And I thought, okay, they look like they've got it all in hand. I went home. I couldn't get into the church. I went home. And later on, we saw more helicopters, and you might remember this, more helicopters flying overhead. And Kim said, should we be worried? You know, a couple of 100 metres that way. And I said, oh, no, I don't think so. It's okay. And then she said, is there anything that if it burnt, you'd be worried about? No, not really. Oh, my boring books, I'd be pretty worried about those. They're irreplaceable antique books in my office. Now, that's not a challenge to any crim here either, by the way. And so Kim said, how about I go down? And so Kim put on her, well, I was going to say Red Cross hat, but it wasn't. It was just, she just came down and spoke to the SES and said, is it all under control? And they assured her that it was. And I think it was about 2 o'clock in the morning, they got that fire put out, which is amazing when you consider just how many volunteers. The SES are basically all volunteers, and the fire service were using volunteers as well. So we are probably more grateful than we realise for how these things play out on our behalf. We had organised this started middle of last year to say, wouldn't it be great to honour our first responders? Tonight, if you didn't quite catch it, this book is called Breakthrough. It was originally published it was called Impossible, and it's the true story of the clip that you saw before with Joyce Smith and her son, who fell into Lake St. Louis in St. Louis, Missouri, and was underwater for 15 minutes. And that's why you saw in America their paramedics I think it's a merge between ambulance and fiery. So they came and they said it's not a rescue anymore, it's a recovery. And so that's the true story of what happened. And it's amazing. It won the most inspirational film of the year. It's produced by Devon Franklin, who's a Hollywood A-lister producer. So it's not one of those cheesy sort of things. And come tonight, 5:30, and we encourage you to bring popcorn. You may also, we've only got 1 box of tissues down here, you may want to bring your own box of tissues as well, because it's very, very moving. But it'll do your soul good to see this incredibly true story. I want to take a few minutes now and share about the heart of a first responder. As you've partly heard, I'm married to one. Kim is involved in usually disaster relief. So Kim has done such things as the Denali fires, and I'm sure you guys are involved, with that as well, down when that happened. And Kim was one of the people that had to go door to door and just check on people. And so when the fires began to happen, we already had the planning for this day in hand, and it just became incredibly timely, we felt, to do that. So what's the heart? What's in the heart of the first responder? And I really, really appreciated what both Lyndon and Scott had to say, particularly about what happens when you take the uniform off and what it does to you as a person. So I want to touch on that a little bit. If you've ever been to an Anzac Day memorial, a dawn service or the 11 o'clock service, you will hear these words, and this is out of John chapter 15. In fact, if you go to the war memorial in town, you'll see this on the monument. It's these words here. This is the preceding verse. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. So this is Jesus talking, and this is the one that you'll see on the monument. You'll hear it nearly every Anzac Day memorial service. It's this verse here. It's out of John chapter 15, verse 13. Greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends. And of course, Jesus himself was the absolute epitome of that. In fact, when we think about it, Christianity has a long history of connection with first responding. Christianity's been involved in healthcare before there was healthcare. So from the first century AD, Christians were involved in going into leper colonies, going into places where those people who were sick and terminally ill were sent out to die, and Christians went into those communities to care for them. So healthcare and Christianity has a very long history. By the way, as Inspector Flood sort of mentioned, the more prisons we have to build is not a measure of how civilised our society is becoming, by the way. And the more hospitals we have to build is not necessarily an indication of how healthy our society is becoming either. So I think as Christians, we've got something to say, but we've also today, we want to show support to our first responders, police, ambos, fireys, SES, Red Cross, and Sea Search and Rescue. Here's the definition of an emergency. This is taken straight out of Webster's dictionary. It's a serious, unexpected, and often dangerous situation requiring immediate action. Immediate action. I was listening to an AMBO, a paramedic, and I'll be referring to him a bit later. He said he was working at Bondi, the Bondi ambulance station, and he said they were dealing with, you mentioned suicides every week. They deal with suicides every day. And he said that they know that if they can get there within 2 minutes, they have a good chance of preventing it. And I was thinking, get there in 2 minutes? Goodness me. That's what you call an immediate response. That's amazing. And he shared the story of how they would do that, and they were able to talk people off cliffs, particularly this thing called the Gap in Sydney. And so that's immediate response. And our society is better off for it, by the way. Much better off for it. Okay, so when you look at that definition, each of the people that have been up here this morning, this is the space that they are in. This is where they come to the fore. They're in that space. But it's also a space where we're responding, or where the first responders are responding oftentimes to things that are about protecting welfare of people as well. And this is not just protecting people and their welfare, sometimes it's protecting their very life as well. So it's not just about minimising harm, it's often about saving life. Not only that, it's also about protecting property. And so it might sound strange for a Christian minister to say this is important because we're not supposed to be materialistic. But when we look at the 10 commandments that God gave, one of them is do not steal, which when you think about it, it's God saying you have a right to own something. You have a right to earn money, buy it and own it, and have people respect your property. And so when fireys go and put out fires that is protecting people's property, and particularly when you see on the news the farmers who are losing cattle and so on, weeping over the loss of their property, which in this case is not just the grass and the dirt, it's animals that they've loved and cared for. This is a really, really noble thing that they do. So first responders are also helping to prevent the loss of life, and this is really, really important. Note this, loss of life can be from accident, it can be from an injury, so it could be on the sporting field. We have a doctor in our church who is a part of the Australian Motor Racing fraternity. So wherever there's a motor race, they are there as a first responding doctor. And so it can also be violence. And we heard Inspector Flood mention that domestic violence is happening at rates now that just didn't happen 20 years ago. So this is becoming increasingly common. But then there's this one, suicide attempts. Suicide attempts. This is increasingly something that first responders, particularly AMBOs and police, are having to deal with. Did you know, I'm not going to mention the number of women that take their own life, but did you know in Australia, on average per week, 42 Australian men take their own life? Just fathom that for a minute. 42 Australian men every week, on average, are taking their own life. 20 to 30 years ago, the numbers were nowhere near this. And you might think, oh, well, that's, per capita. No, the per capita rate is higher as well. This is, as one paramedic who I was listening to, he said, this is actually a national crisis. A national crisis. You extrapolate those numbers over the year, that's over 2,000 people unnecessarily and avoidably die at their own hands. So first responders are what we might call downstream from society's worst problems. So when we say downstream, something's happened upstream where people are being swept down the flowing river and first responders are there to rescue them and do the best they can. In the profound book by a fellow whose name's a little bit hard to pronounce, Vishal Mangalwadi, it's called The Book That Made Your World. He actually makes the case today that in the West there are two alarming trends happening which directly affect the work of first responders. He says increasingly crimes have become more violent and they are nearly always perpetrated by young men. So let's ponder that. Young men are perpetrating increasingly violent crimes. And secondly, he says, the high rate of suicide, and he coins the expression, these are suicides which he calls death from despair. So these are two things that are happening and we can no longer ignore them. And first responders are having to deal, I was going to say they're dealing with it, but I'm not sure, especially after hearing what Lyndon and Scott have said, I'm not sure that they know how to or are prepared to or have the best resources to be able to handle the impact of this. So this is why I really appreciated Inspector Flood's response, because what's the most difficult thing about the job? It's the men and women that he has to care for. And he doesn't look like a very caring guy. But that's what it is. It's making sure they're okay. And even those two words, okay, or one word, however you say it, are you okay? And we see the sticker. It sounds a little bit cheesy and corny, but I heard one suicide prevention expert say it is the single most impactful thing you can say to someone who may be vulnerable to suicide. Are you okay? Are you doing okay? Because oftentimes when they're not doing okay, and first responders, just to let you know, are more likely by a huge factor in our society to not be doing okay than anyone else. And so if you have someone who is a first responder in your world, chances are that first responder doesn't have many people in their world, and you might very well be in a very privileged position. And simply asking the question, are you okay, can make a huge difference. So the things that can be frustrating, and I didn't get to talk to particularly, I spoke with Kim, but I didn't really mention this, the things that make it frustrating when I've spoken with other fireys, and I've spoken with people who are involved in being a first responder, for a fiery, putting out a deliberately lit fire. I mean, Kim, the same thing, you were saying, get the phone call, get ready to go. Kim was that with Fingal, get ready to go, we'll mobilise you any moment now. And then we're watching with interest what's happening down at Fingal, and then it turns out somebody deliberately lit it. And you think, what the heck? Do we all stand in line, take a turn and slap him? How do the fireys feel when they hear this? It's got to be so frustrating. We were driving around Hobart because I went down for the opening of the legal year. Every magistrate, the Chief Justice, they're all there. The law school was there. Professor Rufus Black, the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Tasmania, gave a brilliant talk on why the legal system is failing us. I thought it was brilliant. You would have loved it. And I'm driving around Hobart and I'm just noticing where there wasn't ever graffiti before, there's graffiti everywhere. Someone said to me, what do you think of Hobart as a whole? And I... Anyway, and I saw this and I thought, something's brewing here in Hobart. There's an indication here that all is not well. And this is making it, I think, the job of first responders even more difficult. So when people are deliberately vandalising, when people are deliberately doing things that then first responders have got to go in and mop up. So even Ambo saving the lives of those, and Lyndon sort of alluded to it, I'm not sure if he was thinking about this, but when they go in and save the lives of those who have willfully done great harm to themselves. This is frustrating. I heard an Ambo say that he went to a drug addict and he was incredibly gracious. He said, we have no judgment. But when you go there the third time, it's the third overdose in 2 or 3 weeks, it gets a bit frustrating. That's why I've got in brackets the word again. And Ambos have to deal with this. When now, you didn't mention this, Inspector Flood, but I know this happens in the 2 officers in the Tasmania Police Force. When you take the time to build a case against a drug lord, and they're in Tasmania, they often ride motorbikes, and they build the case, it goes to court, they may even get a conviction registered, and then that police officer has a bounty put on their life by that drug lord even though they're in prison. Can you imagine how frustrating this is? How incredibly frustrating. Or when a Red Cross volunteer, and you heard me ask Kim Brundle-Lawrence this question about recently, there have been people coming up and getting aggressive and violent with Red Cross staff because they've got all this money and they're not handing it out properly. And they're getting aggressive toward Red Cross personnel. And how frustrating is that when you're actually there with all the best of intentions to help people and they do the best job in the world at it, and you face this. And Kim was mobilised to Bairnsdale in Victoria along with a team from Tasmania, and they all came back with respiratory issues as a result of being there helping people with the register people so that, as Kim was explaining, how loved ones can find where they are. Or when SES volunteers help incredibly ungrateful people. For career first responders, this is why, some of these frustrations are why many of them turn to alcohol. So as much as, if you get Scott in a quiet moment, he'll probably say this is a problem. Probably not on camera, but in quiet. This is why many first responders, career first responders, turn to alcohol to numb their own pain. Because as we've heard today, they are human beings. The uniform says that they've got a role, but the uniform doesn't preclude them from feeling the weight of what they've just encountered. And what they've just encountered could be someone take their own life right in front of them. What they've just seen is perhaps pulling someone out of a car that's mangled like they were never meant to be mangled, and that person dies with certain fluids flowing out of their mouth as they attempt to give them mouth to mouth. This can have a haunting effect that for many career first responders, they feel only alcohol can numb that pain. So alcoholism itself can become a problem for first responders. it's also why the rate of suicide among first responders is higher than just about any other sector in society. Now, thanks to Kate Smith, who put me onto this. Thank you, Kate. Kate was a part of Road Trauma Support. I think Kate's been in just about everything. And she put me onto Benjamin Gilmore, who's recently written a book called The Gap. Benjamin Gilmore became an AMBO very early in his life, back when it was, I think he said it was a 3-month course. How's that, Lyndon? A 3-month course to become an AMBO. And he was working out west of New South Wales and earning his stripes, so to speak, and then he was stationed to Bondi in Sydney. And that's when he said he encountered the gap. And the gap is a cliff where many people go to commit suicide. And he was working with a partner by the name of John, who was a much more experienced AMBO, and he said he learnt a lot from this man, but John, he said, knew that rules were meant to be not broken, just bent as much as you could bend them in order to help people without all the red tape. But he said the emotional toll it was taking on both of them, dealing with things like continually dealing with death, continually dealing with grief. And we heard Inspector Flood say the most difficult thing is going to the door of someone and saying your loved one has just died. You can well imagine what it's like when the loved one's actually standing there and their loved one dies in the arms of the first responder. How difficult it is for them to go days later around and ask them, are you doing okay? And he said the irony of it is we're asking them if they're doing okay and we aren't doing okay. He said we have to put on a mask and we have to be, he said, strong for others while we ourselves are not coping. And he said you can only take this so long. They talked hundreds of people off the edge of that cliff, literally, called the Gap. And then one day, as he noticed his partner, John, increasingly turning to alcohol, he said that John experienced a relationship breakdown, and this is the other point that Benjamin makes in his book called The Gap. He said, my relationship with my wife broke up because I couldn't come home and talk about my day. I just couldn't do it. He said John went through a relationship breakdown at the same time as him. And he said he noticed that increasingly he became withdrawn. And this is the temptation for first responders, to withdraw. It's a great irony that those who help people the most are often those who need to be away from people the most. And he said that John withdrew increasingly, turned to alcohol increasingly. And then one day he got a phone call from the station saying, John's taken his own life. At the Gap, the very place where they had both talked people off the edge. I don't know how many of us are going to look at a police officer or an AMBO differently as a result of today. But a part of what we are doing right now is saying, you may think no one quite understands what you're going through. And as we heard, there ain't enough money in the world to pay for some of the things they have to do. But today, to our first responders, we want to say, thank you. We really do. And I'm going to ask you to do that in a moment. First responders also face the problem of exasperation. It's a hazard. It's a work hazard, a job hazard. Exasperation, when you go to the trouble of building a case, you take the person you've arrested, you take them to court, and the magistrate slaps them on the wrist and gives them a course they have to do instead of prison. And it could be because there's no room in prison. It could be that, but then that person goes out, grabs a gun, and either kills someone or threatens to murder someone and puts that person in trauma where young children see it and the whole spiral of criminality begins again. And that becomes frustrating. That's what that word exasperation means. And exasperation can lead to, what is the point? What's the point? So, today, I hope that we encourage our first responders to say with us, there's a point. There's a point. And while I've said first responders work downstream, I want to make the case that we, here in this room, we are the front line working upstream. We play a role in preventing a lot of these problems that these people here today have to deal with. So we have a collective vision for our society. Can you imagine a Tasmania that looks incredibly safe, where you're not worried about your young teenage girls walking out of your door to go to the shop some 3 or 4 kilometres away? You know, there are cities in Australia where you wouldn't dare allow that. But I want that to be our Tasmania, don't you? Where there's no threat for girls to be molested or no threat for girls to be treated as a piece of meat, but they're safe. Where men know how to be protectors, not aggressors. Where men know how to treat women, not abuse women. Where children aren't objects of pleasure for those who take advantage of them, but children are the treasure of our state. And we collectively guard them and look after them. That we'll have a healthy Tasmania. Healthy Tasmania. I know, I'm not sure who the Minister for Health is at the moment. That's a joke. I know who the Minister for Health is. But it's not the Minister for Health. It's the Minister for trying to fix up people's bad health. We actually need someone who's a Minister for Health, if you get my drift. Let's make Tasmania healthy. We have a vision for our state that we can be prosperous and everyone who wants a job can find a job and have a meaningful job. And we were watching the tennis and Ruby was saying, how much do you reckon these commentators are getting paid? Like my daughter just sees dollar signs and everything now. She's going to... I said, sweetie, just be a merchant banker. Don't keep asking me these questions. You want to know, just do that. And then face Royal Commission in your lifetime. And these people who've made millions from playing tennis and all the rest of it are commentating. And she said, why would they do that? They've already got all this money. The reason is because a job is not just about money. A job is about meaning and purpose and a reason to get up in the morning. It's about making a difference in the lives of others. Tommy Emmanuel's my favourite guitarist. He says, I don't play guitar to do concerts. I don't play guitar to sell tickets. I don't play guitar to sell CDs. I play guitar because it makes people happy. What a great reason to play guitar. We want our state to be a contributing state where it's not just 1 in 1,000, but better than that. Get involved in the TFS, the SES, and even consider being a volunteer paramedic. We want people to be contributing. We also want people to be purposeful. They wake up in the morning because they've got a reason to wake up in the morning. And I'm not sure every Tasmanian has that. But surely this can be a part of our collective vision. Surely it can. And if we do that, I think crime rates can go down, health can improve, mental health can dramatically improve, and we in the church have a role and we have something to say into this space. That's why I think the community of our church, the community of the church generally, and there's more people in church on a Sunday than attend AFL football matches over the weekend in Tasmania, we can make a difference. We can make a difference in fulfilling this. And that's why we, the Christian community, play a role downstream. We have a partnership with City Mission. We're involved in drug rehabilitation. We're involved in homelessness. We're involved in helping people who need meals straight away. We're involved in downstream stuff as best we can. But we have a vital role to play upstream. A vital role. Simply by being a Christian, by having someone you can turn to with all your cares and anxieties, who invites us, cast them all onto me, he says. That's a huge mental health boost. And people need to know about this. I want to finish with this story. It's one of my favourite stories that Jesus told. It's the story of the Good Samaritan. It goes like this. And the preface to this is a lawyer came to Jesus and said, what are we supposed to do here? And to sum him up, who am I really supposed to be looking after? And Jesus said this, but he, desiring to justify himself, this is the lawyer, said to Jesus, and who is my neighbour? Jesus replied, let me tell you a story. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers and who stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead, right? We now need first responders. And fortunately, one came along. The next verse says, now by chance, a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he went over straight away and did what he did, and he helped him, and end of story. That's not how the story goes. The priest saw him, and he passed by on the other side. Ew. Not my business. And Jesus is not painting this guy in a really positive light. Then there were the guys that helped the priests. These were called Levites. So likewise, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. He went to him. This is what the Samaritan did. And by the way, the Samaritans were the despised people. They were hated. They were a mixed-raced people who the Jews absolutely despised. He went to him, bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he set him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. He went out of his way, put his routine aside, closed his diary, and took a whole night of caring for this poor man. And the next day, he took out 2 denarii. A denarii is a day's wage. So what's that today? $600. Gave $600 and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I come back. Which of these, Jesus asks, do you think proved to be a neighbour to the man who fell among the robbers? The lawyer said, the one who showed him mercy. And Jesus said to him, you go and do likewise. In that story, Jesus is the Samaritan. In that story, his church is the innkeeper. He will bring people to us who are about to hurtle downstream, and we have a role. In our church right now, we have people who were on the verge and even in the process, some in the process of committing suicide. And something happened and you came to church and your life was turned around. And we want to see that times hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, because our society needs that. So let me say, as I bring this to a close, to all our first responders here present, you are the neighbours to the vulnerable that Jesus described in this story. You are. You're the ones who care for people who are vulnerable because they've been attacked, hurt, taken advantage of. You are. So this is what I want to say to all our first responders, and I want you to join with me, please. So in a moment. So to all our first responders present here, the police, fireys, AMBOs, SESs, Sea Search and Rescue and Red Crosses, we say, would you please stand with me? Just the first responders can stay seated, but everyone else, it's on the screen. You'll figure it, but this is what I want to say. Thank you. Come on.
We hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a like. If you'd like to see more, hit the subscribe button. For more information about our church, head over to legana.org.